Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Township of West Lincoln's Planning and Development meeting for February 12th. We have 3 public meetings tonight, and we've actually scheduled one to start now, and actually 2 for now, and then 1 for a little bit later this evening. So there's probably likelihood of a lot of questions, so I'm going to try and keep these things on track. I'd ask that anyone here from the public this evening to ensure that their phones, PDAs, and any other recording devices be turned off now, please. And this meeting is being videotaped, and it will be available within 2 days of this evening's meeting, and that will be available on the town's website. So anyone wishing to see the replays or the instant replays can watch it then. Oh, I forgot. Yes, anyone here this evening, we'd appreciate it if you could sign the attendance sheet on the benches at the side door. And if you wish to be informed of any future information regarding any of the public meetings or anything that's discussed this evening, please indicate by a tick in the appropriate column what information you would like to have passed on to you. Thank you. All right, this is a public meeting for our first public meeting for this evening is a public meeting to consider a zoning bylaw amendment application. I forgot, conflict. Yes, I went right to my public meeting, and I apologize. I really do need to look at my colleagues here to ask if there's any change in order of items on the agenda. Councillor Bell.
Through you, Madam Chair. If possible, I'd like to bring up Staff Report 8D, Item P 20-18. It's a recommendation report for Mr. Owens for temporary use.
Were you looking to bring that up ahead of the public meetings, though?
If at all possible, I'd hate to see them sit through a lengthy period.
I do understand. I do understand. That is unusual, but I'm sure that
Yes.
it can be accommodated if need be. Hold on, I just need to affirm. Okay, so I have Councillor Bell looking for that to be moved forward. Are there any other changes in the order of items on the agenda? Seeing none, let me look at it this way. Are there any anyone on council against moving that item forward? Seeing none, we'll move that item forward, P20-18. It is a report, a recommendation report with the recommendations that a PD 020-18 regarding Brian Owens' application for temporary use zoning bylaw, zoning file 1601-017-17 dated February 12, 2018 be received, and that that Section 34, Sub 17 of the Planning Act apply, and that no further public meeting is required, and that application for temporary zoning bylaw amendment 1601-017-17 submitted by Brian Owens on behalf of 2090754 Ontario Inc. be approved. I need a mover for that. Councillor Bell, and I need a second. Councillor Canaan. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I declare conflict of interest on this agenda item, please?
I was waiting for that, Mr. Mayor.
As potentially my family could be setting
Involved.
up a fry truck.
Thank you. So the mayor's declared a conflict on this item and will refrain from any discussion or voting on the item. To that point, any discussion on the item? Seeing none.
Oh,
Mr. Treble. You're turning into Mr. Treble? No. Yes, Mr. Treble.
Madam Chair, if I may just speak for 30 seconds. Staff have had some discussions with the applicant as well as internal amongst planning staff, and we're going to suggest, Madam Chair, that on page 261 and 262 of the package for tonight, which is attachment 3, pages 12 and 13 of the report, that the bylaw be changed to remove the number 2 from the wording such that it allows for food trucks or temporary structures for a period of not more than 3 years, but to remove the number or the limitation on the number of vehicles that's there. So that if for some weekend, for some reason, there's a need for a third vehicle to be there, they're not infracting on the bylaw. So staff have proposed and given to Joanne Shimei some revised wording to change the wording of the bylaw at attachment 3, pages 12 and 13 to the report.
Okay, so Part 3, DT-6, permitted temporary uses, is that where we're at, Mr. Treble?
That's correct.
Okay,
In
so
that
existing
particular
uses
line.
plus 2 food trucks or temporary structures for a period of no more than 3 years, I believe is what we're looking at. That is the way the bylaw reads this evening. And the second page, it happens on the second page as well.
In the purpose and effect,
Paragraph
Madam
2,
Chair.
in the purpose and effect of the bylaw, it talks about the zoning bylaw amendment is to change the zoning on the subject property from development D to a temporary use, DT -6 zone, to permit 2 food trucks in addition to the existing use for a period of up to 3 years. Those 2 paragraphs would change to remove the word "to." So that, Mr. Treble, just you might as well say it, would be limitless, so we could have 22, 32, or 3.
Well, except that there is site plan as a control factor, Madam Chair, and obviously a limitation of the size of the property and the regulations from the health unit, et cetera. So there's a number of different factors that would come into play. I just don't want to get into a circumstance where, for a legitimate reason, a third vehicle is appropriate, and then we have to somehow amend the bylaw to do that. It just seems somewhat cumbersome to leave it that way.
I just don't want to have to go into a lengthy debate after we've moved the public meeting to talk about a number of food trucks. So there's a limit by site plan and by health department use.
Correct.
So, having that further information, members of committee, are there any other questions, comments now that Mr. Treble has asked for that change? And in a moment, I'll ask the clerk to read that. Seeing none. I do have a mover and seconder of the motion. But the bylaw is now to change, so we'll have to go back to those people. If, Madam Clerk, if you could read those. I was going to get the amendment on the table.
I was going to move that amendment.
Okay, you don't want to hear it?
Well, just to remove the word "to."
Okay,
That was simple enough.
okay, that's fine. Normally, we read the amendment. I'm good. Okay, so the amended wording for the 2 places in the bylaw will just remove the word "to," and the clerk has wording to that effect that will be inserted into the record for the meeting. Moved by Councillor Bilsma. I was going to get an amendment to the motion from the original mover and seconder, if you don't mind. So the amendment, Councillor Bell?
I'm okay.
Councillor Bell is fine with that friendly amendment, and we're going to do a whole new resolutions. Councillor Bell, Councillor Gannan. Okay. On the amendment, all in favor? That motion carries. And the mayor did not participate or vote. And on the original motion, as amended, all in favor, that motion carries. And again, the mayor did not vote or participate. Thank you. That item carries, and that concludes the motion, the item that was brought forward on the agenda, and now the clerk wishes to speak.
We just need to still deal with disclosure of pecuniary interest and or conflict of interest, although Mayor Joyner has indicated he has a conflict with that item that we just dealt with. We haven't asked the rest of council. Yeah.
Committee. All right, with regard to that disclosure of pecuniary interest before moving into the public meetings, any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Councillor Bell first.
Through you, Madam Chair, I have a conflict of interest with a public meeting staff report C, item P19-18. It's in regards to a technical report, Wade Road, removal of a holding, Ontario Municipal Board appeal. And that's my conflict.
With regard to the Wade Road lot. Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Bell. Mayor Joyner, we've already noted, as the clerk has said, that you have a conflict of interest that you've dealt with already. I'll put it on the record that it was also noted here so that you're not with any issues regarding that. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the public meetings for this evening. Our first public meeting is a temporary zoning bylaw application submitted by Stephen Golfi and Alexandra Denome Clem. Planning Act requires in Section 34, Sub 12, that before passing a zoning bylaw amendment, council must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of informing the public in respect of the amendment. The purpose of this public meeting is to receive comments and answer questions from the public regarding the amendment to the Township of West Lincoln zoning bylaw. At this point, no decision has been made on the proposed amendment, and any comments received will be taken into account by committee and council in their consideration. Planning Act further requires that Section 34, Sub 13, that council advise the public that if a person or public body does not make an oral submission at a public meeting or written submissions to the Township of West Lincoln before the bylaw is passed, that person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of council to the Township of West Lincoln to the Ontario Municipal Board. Madam Clerk, could you please advise the date and methods by which notice of the public meeting was given?
Proper notice was given by way of individual notice dated January 18th, 2018.
Thank you very much. Mr. Burma, I understand you're the planner that will advise us of the purpose and reason for this zoning bylaw amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Application for temporary use zoning has been made by Steve Golfi and Alexandra Demone Clem for the property that they own located at 9112 Regional Road 65 or Silver Street on the south side of Silver Street in the hamlet of Abington. The temporary use zoning application is to allow a mobile home on the property for a period of up to 3 years or of up to 60 days from occupancy being granted for the proposed new dwelling on the property. The mobile home has already been moved on the site and is connected to hydro. The mobile home is approximately 4 meters by 15 meters and was brought on the property with the intent for Steve and Alexandra, as well as their mother, to live in the trailer while they undergo the construction of the main dwelling. A building permit application was received back in August of 2017 for that permanent residence. However, the building department has advised the applicants that there were several deficiencies with that plans, or with the plans which needed a revisal. The building department has also advised that no septic permit has yet been applied for. Now that the mobile home has been brought on the property, which is not permitted in the zoning bylaw, the permit for the main dwelling cannot be issued until the mobile home is temporarily legalized in addition to the permanent dwelling. The property is currently zoned residential R1A, which allows for one single detached dwelling and accessory uses. The placement of the mobile home on the property has already previously been approved by the Niagara Conservation Authority, and the Region of Niagara has also reviewed the application and has no objection to it. Planning staff have been notified that there is a pending bylaw enforcement issue which is under way of being resolved. Staff have received one set of written comments from a group entitled Abington Neighbors. Since there were no names or addresses provided, these comments have not yet been made public. These comments can be included in the future recommendation report if whoever was the author, if they're in the audience, could provide us with their names and addresses, then we can include that in the recommendation report. And planning staff recommend that this final recommendation report be prepared and presented to this committee at a future Planning, Building, and Environment Committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burba. Is the applicant or their representative, their agent here, wishing to address committee? Please come forward, state your name, and come to the podium. These meetings are taped, and we ask everyone to come forward because it's only through talking through the microphones that we can properly record questions, comments, and or concerns. So thank you very much for coming forward.
Sorry.
Sorry about that.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry. I want your wife to have an opportunity to collect herself, but we're more than happy to wait. if whoever
No,
wants to
we're
speak.
okay. She's okay. I'll go. We'll deal with it now, get it over with.
Well, congratulations on
Thank you.
the new member of your family.
Thank you. Boy,
Wasn't that yesterday?
Saturday.
Saturday.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
please feel free, this is
Well,
your chance to comment
Yeah, I
on
put the
what the,
mobile
pub-
home on there so I could build a house to live in there until it was ready. So it's more, the gist of it.
so our staff have captured the information regarding your application and about what you're doing on the site right
Yes,
now,
yeah.
correctly?
Correctly. Yeah.
Okay. If there's anything that council wishes or committee wishes to ask of you this evening, we can call you back up. How's that? We'll make
Okay.
this as easy as we can. Many
Okay.
people come here for the first time, so
Yeah, this
I'll
is
see
my
if
first.
members of committee want to ask any questions, and we'll direct them back at you and bring you back to the microphone.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. I'm just going to check on my wife.
Please. Okay. Now, I'm going to the public. That's all right. It's quite all right. At this point in time, and I've already indicated that we will allow, pardon, Mr. Golfi to come back to answer questions and/or put his position forward as we go through the question period. But at this point in time, it's for members of the public for submissions. So this is a public meeting. It may be the only public meeting on this particular application. It is a zoning bylaw amendment with regard to Stephen Golfi and Alexander Denome Clem. This is the opportunity for members of the public to come forward and state their comments, concerns, or questions. Is there anyone in the audience wishing to put forward comments or questions to the committee? Seeing none, I will ask one more time. Are there any members of the public wishing to make comment on this application? Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to confine the discussion to members of committee. Members of committee, is there anyone wishing to pose questions or concerns? Councillor Trombetta, I apologize. I just didn't want to get you ahead.
Thank you for keeping my place in line there, Madam Chair.
No problem.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to make a couple comments about, I've spoken to, obviously, they were very emotional, they just had a baby. I've spoken to these residents. They are building a new home on the property. This property is just in front or on the side of Abingdon Meatpackers, those few lots that were severed off by
So, Councillor Trombetta, I'd like to, sorry, I don't mean to interject, but I'm going to remind all of council that this is the public meeting, and at this point in time, there's no decisions. We're asking questions, looking for further input, and that the appropriate time for us to voice our opinions and/or any kind of determinations we've come to would be when we're dealing with the item further on the agenda.
Absolutely, I'm just trying, Madam Chair.
I just wanted to put that out to all members of council, not to you specifically. I apologize.
Just to give some history, just to some of my colleagues at the table, that's why I'm just kind of maybe giving some of my comments at the beginning at the moment, so. I just have some comments that I would like to ask. I know that they've put the mobile home on this property, and through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Treble or Mr. Borma, close.
I get in trouble for the S all
Sorry.
the time.
The process that they're at, right, through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Borma, the process that they're at right now is that they have the mobile site there, and as far as I'm aware, that they are going through the proper channels now and getting to where they need to be to allow this mobile home on the property. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, they are working through the process now to legally establish this use for a period of up to 3 years or 60 days after the occupancy is granted for their permanent residence. And that building permit, as I mentioned, has already been submitted back in August, and I think the majority of the issues have been resolved from the building department stance.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Garrett. I appreciate that. So met through you, Madam Chair. So they have met what we need, and now moving forward, once the building application is granted, then the 90, or the 3 years starts as soon as that is approved, or?
Through you, Madam Chair, the 3 years would start, Brian can correct me if I'm wrong, once this zoning has been ratified by council. And there's one other thing that there needs to be a septic that needs to be applied for as well with the house permit, which, as I am aware of this point, has not yet been applied for.
So, sorry, through you, Madam Chair, too. Now, the septic permit is for the dwelling, Mr. Trouble or Garrett, like, it's just through the dwelling, or is it for the mobile home?
I believe Mr. Treble wanted to deal with that one.
The, excuse me, through you, Madam Chair, the complication is that the mobile home is where Mr. Golfi and his wife would like to reside. And we're comparing this to a situation where a farmer has an existing house on his farm or her farm and wishes to build a new house and wants to live in the existing house while the new house is being constructed. This is kind of the comparable. But in those cases, the house is there, it has its own septic system and its own cistern, which may or may not have anything to do with the new house. In this particular case, the mobile home has not yet been connected to services. So from a planning point of view, if there's a way that the septic and cistern for the new house can be installed and temporarily the mobile home utilize those same services, then it all would work and it could be a place of residence. But somehow through this process before occupancy, they're going to have to get all of that in order.
Okay. No further questions, Madam Chair. Thank you. May I have further questions later on down the agenda?
Excellent. Counselor Bell?
I just, so until such a time, should this temporary application for zoning be approved, the building permit cannot be completed. Is that what I understand through you, Madam Chair?
Mr. Treble?
Through you, Madam Chair, at this particular point in time, a single-wide mobile home is not a permitted use on the property, so the temporary use bylaw would deal with that and allow for that mobile or that permit to be issued once council ratifies the bylaw necessary for this process. The permit for the house could have been issued, but now that the mobile home is there, it's complicated things. So we need to legalize the mobile home before that permit for the house can technically be issued right now, because there is a structure technically on the property that is a residence. So get the mobile home in place. If council supports that concept, then the building permit can be issued for the permanent residence at that appropriate time.
And one more, Madam Chair. I guess this is more for the applicant. Should this be granted tonight, how soon would you be moving forward with the building department to look after the building permit and the septic system?
Right away.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The answer to that question was right away by the applicant. I have a speakers list. So, Councillor Rayner, and
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Mr. Trouble.
I got you, Doug.
Are they occupying the mobile home at the present time?
Through you, Madam Chair, it's our understanding that the building department is of the opinion that somebody is residing in the mobile home. I'm personally not aware of who, but it would appear that somebody is there, and as of Friday, an order was posted on the door prohibiting occupancy because there is no adequate septic or water systems with this mobile home. So I can't get into anything more because I don't know anything factually beyond that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through Mr. Trouble. That's why I asked the question. I thought even in the mobile home situations, you cannot authorize the occupancy until you have the water and the sewage systems properly connected in order to have occupancy. You can't do it the reverse. Is that correct?
That is correct. Through you, Madam Chair.
Okay.
Councillor Bilsma, sorry, you are next.
My question is to Director to either Planner Bourma or Planner Treble. Is it possible to have some kind of temporary tank or some kind of holding system that could be pumped regularly, so that they don't have to spend, like, I think I'm getting a gist of what they're trying to accomplish. I also know that you don't want to throw too much good money after something too temporary. So, for example, to insist that they put a septic bed in for a mobile home that possibly could only be used for 3 months is quite extraneous. And they do have the option of applying for a septic bed for the dwelling, installing that, and somehow tying into that. But that might not be possible with weather conditions and frost and those kinds of things. Is there another way that perhaps some kind of holding tank? I mean, look, mobile homes travel across the country, or RVs travel across the country. They have self-contained septic tanks that are pumped or dealt with, serviced, maintained on a use basis. Is there a way that we could accommodate, is there a way we can see through this to perhaps allow, not necessarily leniency, but deal with the septic and the water issues? Is that a possibility in this situation?
Is there temporary?
Through you, Madam Chair, from a planning perspective, I would say that there must be some solution out there. The challenge is it's a building code related matter, so we really need Mr. Golfi or his wife or someone to get speaking to our septic expert, Lyle Killens, as soon as possible. To the best of my understanding, no discussions of that nature have occurred, permanent, temporary, or otherwise. So I would strongly encourage, Madam Chair, through you, that something happen before staff bring a recommendation report back to have an answer to the question in terms of what the right way to handle septic for this mobile home and cistern for this mobile home would be.
So basically what I hear is the planning department's willing to entertain a plan to help this application through, and if something satisfactory comes up, that would be part of the recommendation report at the later time, correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a number of options, and I just think they need to talk directly to the approval authority.
Thank you, that's all.
Okay. Mayor Joyner, for a first time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Mr. Treble. Mr. Treble, did I hear you say that the mobile home is in the exact location of where the house is supposed to go? Did I hear you say that, or Mr. Borma?
Through you, Madam Chair, there is a site plan I believe we can put up that should show the mobile home as well as the proposed residence.
So the yellow is the mobile home? Yes?
Could somebody-
So, through you, Madam Chair, yes, the yellow is a mobile home. There's a driveway, I guess it gets partly cut off, but the driveway is also shown, and the connection to the road. That part is all constructed. You can drive to the mobile home now, and the dwelling is proposed just behind in the larger box at the bottom.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. My next question is, was there a culvert put in? Through you to Mr. Treble or Mr. Borma. And was there a permit taken out for the culvert?
Through you, Madam Chair, I can confirm that we have seen a culvert permit approval that has been issued by the Conservation Authority for the property. I believe, however, that issuance happened after the first installation occurred and that there was some corrective work that had to occur.
Through you, Madam Chair, when a culvert is put in the township of West Lincoln, because this is a regional road, who has the authorizing ability there? Is it the township, the MPCA, and the region? All three, or just one?
If I may, for a second, Madam Chair, the culvert, I believe, is through there. So it's actually.
It's not on the road.
No, through you, Madam Chair, it's a my apologies for leaving my desk. It's a Conservation Authority.
As long as you don't come near us,
approval.
you're fine. It's okay.
Okay, so thank you, Madam Chair. So let me change my question up then. The culvert at the road, was a permit taken out through the region, through the township, or anyone else to put in that culvert?
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't know the answer to that question. For the region. So I'm being told the region inspected a culvert at the road.
Okay.
Yeah.
My question, Madam Chair, is was a permit taken out?
Through you, Madam Chair, the region submitted comments, and in their comments, they indicated that a permit was applied for an entrance permit on Silver Street for this property.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions for now, Madam Chair.
Okay, Councillor Trombetta.
Yeah, I just want to kind of agree with what Councillor Bosma is saying, to find something that we can do temporary, because, you know, you made a good point there, that if you have to put a septic bed in or a water cistern in for that property. Once you start mobilizing equipment and everything else, it's only an acre property. And once you're mobilizing equipment and excavators and stuff like that, you're jeopardizing the bed. So so my question through you, Madam Chair, to Brian, was the septic intended for this temporary use just for the size of that trailer, or is the septic intended for the building permit of the dwelling? How does it work?
Through you, Madam Chair, I can't say with certainty, but it would have been my thought that you would design the size of the system based on the dwelling and then just connect the mobile home into that
So-
permanent septic system. That would be my
Which-
thought.
That's what my kind of thought is too, through you, Madam Chair, to Mr. Treble. And I've done this on my property as well, and obviously the septic size, you know, it depends on the size of the bedrooms and so on and so forth, and it could take up a good percentage of the lot, is what I'm saying. So to put a septic system and a water cistern for this prior to building your dwelling, it's just, to me, it's kind of just doesn't make sense. So I'm kind of concurring what Councillor Bosma is saying, that we have to find some sort of temporary septic and cistern use, because, again, if you put a cistern and a septic bed, it's going to take up a good percentage or a good quarter of this lot. So I hope we can find some resolution of, come together to find something temporary for this mobile home, because it doesn't sort of make sense. And like I said, it's going to throwing money out the window. What was said around the table kind of makes sense if you do it that way. So
Thank you.
just some comments. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just hearing everything around the table and where we're going with this, the owners of the property, they've made a few mistakes, no doubt. They want to rectify them, they want to move forward with it. I'm happy that our building department is working with them, and they too want to move this forward. I hear the septic tank and the water, yeah, I get it's a small lot, small parcel. If our building department verbally is willing to get Mr. Killens involved themselves and the owners as soon as possible, and let's move this forward so that we can come out on the top side of this. I don't have a problem supporting this zoning bylaw tonight to move it forward, so. that's
At the
all.
appropriate time, we'll
At
take
the
those
appropriate
comments.
time,
Thank you,
yes.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you.
Okay. I think I have one more. Councillor Rayner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through to Mr. Treble. Mr. Treble, has there ever been examples in the past of this situation where a mobile home has been put on a property that they want to build a house on? I know in the past it's usually been old farmhouses and you build a new one and then you've got 60 or 90 days to take it down, and we have a $5,000 deposit or whatever to make sure, because in the past sometimes those buildings didn't necessarily come down after the new one went up. But this is a different situation. Have we had something similar to this before where a mobile home was used instead of an existing old farmhouse?
Through you, Madam Chair, there's one instance I'm aware of that might be somewhat comparable in this township, and that was a situation that was a result of a fire on a property where the farmhouse burnt down, and a a portable type unit was brought in for temporary accommodations, that was considered an act of God, and a special provision of the old bylaw allowed that to happen. We didn't have to go through a public meeting temporary use bylaw process to allow that. There was simply a clause in the old bylaw that gave that authority. So that would be a comparable, but we haven't done a temporary use bylaw that I'm aware of for this circumstance.
Thank you. Councillor Rayner?
Madam Chair, I was under the assumption when the septic system was going to go in, the septic system was built and designed specifically for the house, and the mobile home was going to be temporarily attached to it. Septic systems are very large, as Councillor Trombetta mentioned, and take up a considerable amount of the 1 acre lot at times, depending on how many bedrooms you have and a number of other factors, how many bathrooms and all the rest. So obviously, it's very expensive, and you certainly don't want to do it twice. So my assumption in this from the beginning has always been that they were going to put in a permanent septic system designed for where they want the house, but the mobile home was going to be close enough that it could hook into it, and therefore allow them to proceed and get things done in a timely manner and take a lot of pressure off them. I agree with Councillor Bell. I'd like to see this thing move forward too. We're here to positively help as much as we possibly can. And these people are here tonight because, you know, they're asking for our help and direction, and I'm pleased to see that the township has tried to work with them. So we've got to find a way to do this. It's just kind of an unusual thing, but I don't think it's necessarily an impossible thing to be done. The septic system, fine, the water shouldn't be, does the water necessarily have to be that you have to put a cistern in? Or can there be a tank dropped off that would serve the purpose until such point as the cistern's put in? Through you,
Mr.
Mr.
Treble?
Treble.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm not actually sure on the answer to that one. Septic is clearly a building code responsibility. Cistern doesn't tend to fall under the building code so much. So clearly a potable supply of water needs to be provided in some fashion and presumably in some way that won't freeze up in this time of year. But I don't know. Have you figured out water supply? For water too. So
tonight, we're dealing with the planning issue before us. I understand, and I've got some questions when committee's done, but I understand now that we narrow it down to the planning issue, these other issues are not without opportunity to resolve. Is that correct?
that would be my thought, Madam Chair.
Because I'm looking for the CBO and the septic guy. They're not here tonight to answer our questions.
No, but they're doable. It's just a matter of figuring out exactly whether it's a holding tank or a full-fledged system that accommodates the permanent house. Those kind of discussions are easy to have.
So, Madam Chair, basically what we're saying is the township is willing to work with the party, and they're willing to do it in a positive way to resolve this so that their dreams can come true and they can build the home they want where they want to build it. So I'm quite prepared to move forward with this, and I'm pleased that both parties are coming together, understanding that there are some problems, but they're not insurmountable. They can be done, and we can move forward. So thank you.
Thank you. So from a planning perspective, if you don't mind, I see no other speakers. I'd like to understand a couple things myself. Going back to the bylaw, why did we not put in that special provision, that clause that would have not required us to have a public meeting with regard to this when we moved from the old bylaw to the new bylaw?
Through you, Madam Chair, the example was because of an act of God.
It's a God
That
act.
clause is in the new bylaw.
Okay.
This doesn't quite meet the circumstance, but it's comparable.
So in fact, tonight what we're looking at is the fact that there is, from a planning perspective, because I believe that my colleagues have touched on everything that's got to be dealt with, but from a planning perspective, we seem to have a bit of a conundrum, and that is that there's a building permit that can't be issued because there's an unlawful use, use not allowed by the bylaw under the Planning Act to have a temporary trailer there. Am I correct in gathering that? So if we remove the trailer for 20 seconds and the building permit was in and was complete, we could stamp the building permit, assuming everything was there, and they had a septic permit, et cetera. We could remove the trailer, put it out on the road, bring it back across the culvert, and we'd be Jim and dandy. Am I hearing that? No.
No.
Please
through you-
explain that to me, because
Certainly.
I just want to get the planning information out onto the table. I do believe that this committee and the rest of the community would love to see that all the non-planning issues are resolved as well.
So through you, Madam Chair, if this was a vacant lot, the issuance of a building permit for a permanent residence would be no problem. In this particular case, however, the mobile home has arrived first, and it is not permitted. So even if it was to be pulled out onto the road, in theory, to make it a vacant lot again, the mobile home could not be put back on site because it's still a prohibited structure that's not permitted by the bylaw. So one way or the other, there needs to be a temporary use if they intend to live in the mobile home while they're constructing the permanent residence on site. Whether you deal with the temporary use on a plain piece of property while they're building their permanent house and the mobile home was to come in after or before, we still need to go through this process to make it legal on this
So
property.
if I want a granny flat, or if that's, I guess, a trailer that you can put on the house, or you can convert a garage, or if I want to put a trailer on my lot, on my property, whatever I want to do, I have to go through this entire conundrum and put forward an ask in the form of a bylaw, and then wait 30 days after it's passed, which means that next month we'll see it again, and then 30 days of appeal. Well, it has to go to council first, so we're going to be 3 months down the road before this can happen, right?
Through you, Madam Chair,
Roughly.
under normal timelines of this committee, a rec report would be next month, March the 12th, and
Yes.
council decision would be 2 weeks after that, so March the 26th, I think, if I did the math right. Unless committee wants to follow some different timeline, that would be the timeline, and so the 20 days would then start.
The appeal period.
The appeal period would start right after the March 26th decision of council, if that was a favorable decision. That would be sort of the normal process that would be followed in this kind of circumstance. And whether it's a garden suite or whether it's this type of temporary accommodation, both are a public meeting process.
But when people go against our bylaws and and things happen, but they're trying to rectify it, we do not pursue any kind of aggressive behavior and/or penalties while they're doing that. Am I correct? We've done that before on berms and trucking and things.
That would be correct, Madam Chair. The only complication is here, though, if there is somebody residing in the dwelling, which is what we understand may be the case, that is a health and safety violation under the building code. So it's a little different than the zoning bylaw infraction. That's the catch.
Yeah, okay. I'm trying to get to the place where sense and reason, I just need to understand before I get to the actual report and we deal with it. But I think that the questions I'm asking are basically pointed at the report when we go to deliberate that. So, thank you for your answers, Mr. Treble, Mr. Borma, and, okay, so are there any other members of council? No, we've gone past that. So, unfortunately, please be advised that this is a technical report that we are considering this evening tonight. This planning, I apologize, my computer just decided to go to sleep. And that the recommendation report will be forthcoming to a future planning committee and council meeting. Please be advised that once the planning committee and/or council has made a decision with respect to the zoning bylaw amendment, and if approved by council, a notice of its passing will be circulated with an appeal period. As indicated earlier, there is an attendance sign-in sheet located on the table next to the exit doors, and we ask that all present sign in, please. If you wish to be advised of anything further with regard to this application, not only sign the attendance sheet this evening, pardon me, but place a check mark in the column marked Golfy if you want to be advised. Therefore, people who are interested in observing council and/or committee discussion about a particular bylaw should not solely rely on mailed notices and thus miss the opportunity to attend meetings. It is suggested that you watch the township's website for posting of agendas to review items that will be discussed at a council and/or committee meetings. The agendas for meetings are posted on the township website at 4 p.m. on the Friday prior to the meeting. Additionally, meeting schedules are also noted on the website for public to view. If you wish to receive notices by email, it is suggested that you include your email address with your mailing address and your phone number on the attendance sign-in sheet. Thank you very much, and I declare this public meeting adjourned at 7:25. Okay. We have a second public meeting with scheduled for the commencement of this meeting, and that would be a planning meeting required under the Planning Act for a zoning bylaw amendment for Shea Jor Gao. This meeting is to consider a zoning bylaw amendment submitted by Shea Jor Gao. The Planning Act requires in sections 34 sub 12 that before passing a zoning bylaw amendment, council must hold at least one public meeting for the purpose of informing the public in respect to this amendment. The purpose of this public meeting is to receive comments and answer questions from the public regarding the amendment to the Township of West Lincoln zoning bylaw. We stress that at this point, no decision has been made on the proposed amendment, and any comments received will be taken into account by committee and council in their consideration. Planning Act further requires through section 34 sub 13 that council and committee advise the public that if a public person or public body does not make oral submissions at a public meeting or make written submissions to the Township of West Lincoln before the bylaw is passed, the person or public body is not entitled to appeal the decision of committee or council for the Township of West Lincoln to the Ontario Municipal Board. Madam Clerk, could you please advise of the method and dates upon which notice was given?
Proper notice was given by way of individual notice dated January 11th, 2018.
Oh, thank you very much. Mr. Treble, I believe it's you that will be giving us the background regarding this application.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is the third public meeting for an application that was received in June of 2017. The application affects 1374 Port Davidson Road, which is a 20.9 hectare agricultural property that's zoned and designated for agricultural purposes. The applicant is proposing to establish some greenhouses on this property to start the production and growing of medical marijuana. The proposal is to establish new structures, up to 15 hooped greenhouse type structures for the purposes of the growing of the medical marijuana, and those structures would meet the 150-meter setback requirement of the township zoning bylaw and are proposed to comply with the fencing, security fencing requirements of our zoning bylaw as well. There is also a proposal to establish a processing component on the property, and there's an indication that there could be some 10,200 square meters of structure proposed as a result to accommodate all of the different growing and processing type uses that are part of this proposal. So, Madam Chair, just for a bit of history, as I know the public is aware, but just to sort of put it all before us, when staff started reviewing this application in June of last year, it was our understanding that it was actually a licensed facility that was being proposed through Health Canada. But as a result of a meeting with the applicants, it became clear that there were actually 4 licenses for the property, and at that point it was staff's understanding that it was going to be a designated facility, which means that the owner of the property was the one growing the medical marijuana for the persons who have the 4 Health Canada licenses. Then towards the end of the last public meeting that we had, Council may recall that there was actually a bit of a misunderstanding even between the planner of the day and the applicant, and it appeared that the 4 individuals were going to be growing their own marijuana based on the discussions towards the end of that public meeting. We now have a new planner on the file, and there's also a lawyer that is representing Shea Jor Gao as well. And to be quite honest, Madam Chair, there is some indication in the planning report that we have now. This is the second professional planning report that we have, this time by Mr. Rivers. There is some indication in there that Mr. Rivers is indicating that they're proposing to use the existing buildings in addition to building these new buildings on the property. But yet, as of today, I understood from Mr. Lewin, the lawyer, that in fact is not the case, and I believe there is no requirement to use the existing buildings. So I think, to be honest, Madam Chair, I just want to put it on the record, I'm not sure planning staff still understand completely what this application is that's before us. And I would strongly ask that the representative for the applicant try and make it clear for all, perhaps as part of his presentation when he starts, so that we know kind of where we're starting from in this application, because I see inconsistencies between what Mr. Lewin is indicating and what the planner of today is indicating as well. Unfortunately, I don't think the planner is here tonight, but the lawyer is here. So perhaps, Madam Chair, I'll leave it there, and I can answer questions as we go.
Fine. So having heard that, there are an abundance of questions that are left by you to be answered as well. I think committee needs to ask as many questions as they have necessary. We may have to adjourn this meeting to get answers if the planner is not here. That's unfortunate. But we'll proceed as required, and the item is on the agenda further this evening if members of committee wish to put forward their understanding of further direction to staff. Okay. Is the applicant or the agent for the applicant here? I understand the planner isn't so. Sir, you must be the lawyer that our staff referred to. If you'd come forward and wish to address committee, state your name and for the record, please, and proceed with your comments on the application.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name's Paul Lewin, Lewin. I'm counsel for Shay Jorgao. He is the owner. He is helping 4 friends who are medical marijuana patients. They're seeking permission to grow medical marijuana on the property. They all have serious health issues, but they cannot afford to purchase their marijuana from the big companies. The 4 patients are all of modest means. I want to start by saying that the 4 patients are absolutely determined to be good neighbors and to do whatever it takes to be good neighbors. They know that the property must be kept in good repair, the grass must be kept, and I understand that wasn't happening. And I also understand there was a weed that was festering in the late fall, and we learned of it at a point in which the land was snow covered. The patients know they must be proactive with respect to the weed and all-around care of the property. The property must be kept in good repair. And this will be a recurring theme in my submissions to you today, is that the patients and Mr. Gao, but it's really for the patients, have a single-minded determination to be good neighbors, and to be respectful of the community, and in particular the neighbors. As you heard, our planner, Stephen Rivers, is not present. He is available by cell phone. I know we can't patch him in by cell phone. He had a long scheduled family vacation in British Columbia. His planning reports before the has been provided to you. This is what he would say if he was here. He would say that the medical marijuana production facility produces a crop and is therefore an agricultural use permitted in a prime agricultural area. The use conforms with the policies of the provincial policy statement, the Niagara Regional Official Plan, and West Lincoln Official Plan. And finally, there is no significant negative environmental, traffic, visual, agricultural, or noise impacts. I expect the issues today are going to be focused on marijuana, on security, and on our plan to address marijuana smell. I'm going to focus on those issues. With that in mind, I've brought Jack Lloyd and Daniel Bouffard with me. Mr. Lloyd helped prepare our plan to address smell. He's going to speak very briefly, with Madam Chair's permission, about smell and our plan to address it. He's a longtime cultivation editor for Green Candy Press, the largest marijuana cultivation publisher in the world. He helped draft, Normal Canada's draft cultivation rules. He's also a lawyer who deals with marijuana and marijuana growing. In addition, Mr. Bouffard, who's also present, Mr. Bouffard is our technical HVAC expert who's reviewed our plan to address temperature, smell, and air quality. He has extensive experience managing temperature, odor, and air quality at large industrial builds. He has prepared a report which is attached along with our planning justification report, and he can address technical issues regarding temperature, airflow, and air quality, and odor, most importantly. Mr. Treble's right. There's 2 things I have to address before I go any further, just to be absolutely clear. The first is that the marijuana will be stored in the warehouse, and and that's, you can see that in the technical report. That has a 150-meter setback. We are not seeking to initially store the marijuana in an existing building, and I think that's what had been in previous planning reports, that it was going to be initially stored in one of the existing buildings. We're not going to do that. My apologies for not being more clear about that, but I want to be crystal clear that the marijuana will be stored in the warehouse from day one. The other thing I should clarify, on page 5 of the technical report number 3, it uses the term designated growing. In this case, these are personal grow registrations in which the patients grow for themselves. With the designated grower registration, the patient designates one other person to grow for them. This is a personal grow registration in which the patient grows for themselves. Both of those types of grow registrations, and I'm using the term registration, they used to be called licenses, and Health Canada has recently changed the term to registrations. It's the same thing, really, and both are very similar. It's either the designated person or the patient growing just for themselves. There's no scale, there's no selling, and I guess I want to make the distinction that we're not like the large companies that are called licensed producers, or LPs are terms that are used to describe them. The LPs are the big companies like Tweed and Aurora. These big companies, they don't just grow marijuana, they package marijuana, they mail marijuana to hundreds, if not thousands of customers. They don't have plant limits. Their operations would make this look like peanuts. They have a large staff and they make a lot of money, and they're all interested in getting in on the recreational marijuana market when it becomes legal. This is not what's being proposed here. This marijuana garden is only for these 4 seriously ill patients. No other persons will receive any of the marijuana. No other persons will attend at the greenhouses. There are no customers. This is not a company. You should note as well that the registrations, how they work is they last only for 1 year. So that 1 year starts running from when the doctor signs, it's called a medical document, authorizing the patient to apply for one of these registrations. And these 4 registrations have all either just expired or they're just about to expire. And the 4 patients intend to wait to reapply until they're legally entitled to grow by the municipality. And I know there was an issue previously about them commencing. They received their Health Canada registrations and they said, oh, the federal government have approved us. They foolishly went ahead and they didn't have council's approval regarding the zoning issues. They're not even going to apply for anything until they know that they're good to go at all levels of government.
What's that?
I want to just briefly discuss a case that I think is relevant to our issues. In federal court 2 years ago, there was a court challenge concerning whether the government could pass a law that would completely ban personal growing. The case was called Allard versus the Queen. And in that case, the federal court held that a medical marijuana system that completely prevented all patients from growing their marijuana was unconstitutional. And the court didn't just say, well, everyone can just go and grow whenever they want to. The court found that it is possible to safely and responsibly grow marijuana without bothering your neighbors. And that's what we want to do. We want to propose safe, responsible growing rules that respect the community. And so I won't talk a lot about this, but what the federal court, they didn't say that a patient should always be permitted to grow, that any patient who's sick, whose doctor approves them, should be allowed to grow. But they did say that if the patient's doing it in a safe and responsible way that respects the community, then they should be permitted to grow, is what they said. So I guess in some ways, West Lincoln's sort of a little ahead of the curve. They're saying, listen, we're not closing the door on medical marijuana patients. We're just saying we've got to make sure you're doing this in a safe and responsible manner that respects the community. I'll say a few words about security. There will be, as you know, a requirement, a 1.8 meter security fence around the growing facility. There will be a security system designed by Safe Tech Alarm Systems, which will include 18 surveillance night vision HD cameras on the front entrance, on the perimeter of the greenhouses, on the safes in the warehouse, and on the warehouse door. And please note, and this is my error again, on page 14 of our planning report, it refers to that the surveillance camera will be on the barn door. It should be the warehouse door. That's my mistake. My apologies for that. There will be an alarm system and motion detectors inside the greenhouses. We've been told by SafeTech that this is the latest technology and it's of a good quality. The cannabis will be stored in 4 safes, 1 for each patient. So, and those will be in the warehouse as well. We're going to, I would suggest to you that making sure the property is secure is a smart thing to do regardless, but the security is not just for the patients. It's also so that the community knows that the property is being kept secure. We want the neighbors to have no concerns about what's going on there. And I guess, I know that when people hear the word marijuana is being grown in a place, there's a tendency to wonder if sketchy people are going to start showing up, if there's going to be violence or all sorts of unsavory activities. And, you know, I know marijuana was a criminal matter for a very long time in Canada, for decades and decades. And during that time, the only people involved in the criminal matter were criminals. So I get it. I understand why people would hear marijuana is being grown. What is this about? Well, we don't want gangs in here, but things are different now. It's now medical marijuana patients regularly grow their own medicine in a safe, responsible manner. Just because it involves marijuana does not make it unsafe for the community. And I'd like to note that the question of whether medical marijuana gardens are unsafe for the community because of violence or unsavory characters was addressed in the Allard case. And that was a huge court challenge, so both sides called the very best experts they could get on both sides. So the court had the benefit of the top experts in the country. And after hearing from all the experts, the judge said that there's just no evidence that medical marijuana gardens attract violence or and that this should be a concern. So, and you know, before I wrap up and I hand this over to Jack Lloyd, I want to stress this is not a dispensary where people will come by to make a purchase. Nobody's coming by. There's going to be no purchases. There's going to be no cash because nobody's selling anything. There's going to be no signs up advising what this is. There's going to be no recreational marijuana. And everyone's hearing about this is in the news daily about recreational marijuana and how this is going to change things. If people want recreational marijuana, then they have to go to the government stores. And you know, I think that because marijuana is going to be legal soon, I think really there's, and many people are saying this, and this is a big part of the government's motivation for doing this, is that when it becomes legal, there's no longer a market for marijuana. And so this idea that, well, what if it goes to the black market? If they're approved, by the time they get their licenses, they are able to start, it's going to be legal in Canada. So I guess to finish off, I want to stress this is just 4 patients. They're the only people who are going to be coming and going. They all have serious health issues. These are quiet, private people who are determined to be good, respectful neighbors. Now I'm going to, with Madam Chair's permission, if I may ask Mr. Lloyd, he's going to discuss smell, and smell like the other issues. We are absolutely determined to make sure there's absolutely no smell leaving the greenhouses.
Sir, we've given you all kinds of liberty because we've listened to legal cases when this is a planning matter. So I'm going to let you continue to give us as much information as you can. And then I'll turn it to members of the public to give us their things. So inform us as much as you can.
Okay, all right. So this is, so the idea is there's going to be no passive air leaving the building. The air is going to go.
You can bring your expert forward.
He'll do it this much better than me. So,
Yeah,
Madam Chair.
I wasn't suggesting you had to do it. I was just saying there's been some liberty on the extent that you've already taken. So please continue with your information to us, and at the appropriate time, my committee will ask questions.
Thank you. So, so Mr. Lloyd, if you could come forward.
Thank you kindly, Council. My name is Lloyd, L-L-O-Y-D, initial J. I've been introduced just to speak about odor, which is a concern I expect for neighboring properties and maybe in general for planners. These are closed greenhouses with air intake vents, and so your concern with odor in general is it escapes through these air vents, either in or out. And so the way that you deal with that is you create a system of negative air pressure. So air is never leaving the greenhouse unless it's gone through an activated charcoal filter. And so the charcoal filter removes smell. Cannabis only produces an odor by way of a chemical called a terpene or a terpenoid. It only produces that odor when it's flowering. And so your issue, and this is perhaps what raises concerns for many people, is if you have a high density of cannabis plants in a garden, it produces a lot of odor, and it's very difficult for any filtration system to deal with that. This particular garden would generally have a maximum of 69 flowering cannabis plants in the greenhouse. And what that means is A, there's not a lot of odor being produced in there, and B, provided you have a system of negative air pressure that's being vented through charcoal filters, no cannabis odor would be leaving the greenhouse. And in general, I have a small practice dealing with medical cannabis compliance issues as a lawyer, and I produce literature dealing with this subject. That is how you deal with the odor issue in cannabis gardens. It has to do with plant density and the system of air pressure as well as your filtration system. And so the proposal is to have activated charcoal filters operating at all times so that any air leaving these greenhouses, which contain the flowering plants, is being filtered. So there's no odor leaving them. And because they're constantly drawing air in, the odor is not simply escaping. So that would be how any licensed producer would operate their if they're operating it properly. And again, as Mr. Lewin expressed, the difference is this isn't a commercial production site, and so the smaller plant numbers mean that the risk of odor on a commercial scale isn't there in the way that you would see with a garden that's focused purely on large-scale production. So those are the main issues. So low plant numbers, which also you get better airflow around the plants, so the odors are sucked up into the charcoal filters. And the other important thing that you may even want to add to your bylaw is regularly changing the charcoal filters. That's how you deal with smell. So 4 to 6 months, the filters need to be changed. And so long as you do that, it's used in the petroleum industry, which produces far more noxious odors. These charcoal filters are very effective at dealing with that odor, as well as the negative air pressure, as I mentioned. I'm happy to answer any questions. If you have specific questions, we do have an HVAC specialist here as well, if you'd like to address them. Do you have questions for me at present?
We can stop this public meeting in order to have questions, but we haven't heard from the public as yet. Let's wait until we do this in normal order. So you get to wait just like we have
Absolutely.
to stay. So enjoy.
Thank you.
Okay, did you want your HVAC specialist to come up at this point in time, or you were just saving that for nothing?
I think it's probably best out with question period.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
Mr. Mayor,
I would like to hear from the APAC specialist, please.
fine. If you have, we'd like to hear an overview of your comments as a specialist with regard to HVAC and greenhouses, and this type of greenhouses that are being suggested for this particular site. Now would be good.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Mayor?
I would like to hear about the HVAC. I would like to hear from the HVAC specialist in relation to a hooped-styled greenhouse.
That's actually why I mentioned the type of greenhouses
Thank
that
you,
are being
Madam Chair.
suggested here. And if there has been a change from the hooped style that were suggested originally.
Okay,
Okay?
sounds great. So the design of these greenhouses will be based around having an intake air accumulate in the front and go through in a flow-through design to the back, where we will have these high CFM fans with activated carbon filters that would be adequate to provide enough airflow to cool the greenhouse without allowing atmosphere to escape the greenhouse unfiltered.
If you are putting in the HVAC system, could you please give us an outline? I think that was the question the mayor was looking for, was what kind of greenhouse is this? Is this still a relatively low hooped greenhouse, hooped with plastic covers, plastic
Yes,
disposable,
poly.
or is this now a poly greenhouse or a glass greenhouse?
To my understanding, based on the plan, this would be a poly hooped style house that would have relatively lower ceilings than the average typical glass or double poly guttered greenhouse, as they refer to them. So it would be a relatively smaller hoop style greenhouse that wouldn't require such major commercial airflow CFM ratings as the bigger greenhouses.
Madam Chair,
Sir,
just a clarification for you, sir. The construction material is what, polyurethane?
To my understanding, it should be. Yes.
And what thickness of the polyurethane would it be?
That I would not be aware of at this time.
And where would the HVAC be positioned on the polyurethane hooped styled greenhouse? On top, on the side, on
It
the
would
ends?
be based on the ends to create a linear flow through the hoop style greenhouse. And that would allow our intakes to open up when required based on temperature and activate the exhaust fans that would then filter through the carbon filters, which would allow the airflow to be a linear path directly through the entire greenhouse, covering all the plant surface area to make sure everything is evenly climatized.
so the summation of your review of this, I think just because we would normally wait and there'll be opportunity to ask you questions, you normally would give your proposal or overview of what it is that your involvement is in the greenhouses. So I don't think that we've heard all of that, but if that is all that's there that you have to offer, then we will want to ask a number of questions. But the process actually is for you, as the specialist supporting the applicant, to come forward. This is your chance to talk and tell us everything you want to tell us. Then we'll get to the public, and then we'll go to questions. So we're looking for you to give us all the information you possibly can, and that's why the mayor was trying to prompt you with questions.
Yes.
So is the motor, what's the size of the motors, what's the timing of the fans running, all that kind of stuff that you would normally tell us that would worry us about smell and noise is what we're looking for now from you as the HVAC specialist.
So this is all based around the proposal they have, in which case they have actually decided to oversize the CFM requirements based on the volume of each hooped greenhouse, in which case they, based on the CFM ratings, have almost doubled the required CFMs to maintain airflow to create this negative pressure system. That way, none of the odors can escape.
Okay, so I'm not going to ask any more questions. I was just kind of prompting you to get us out there with all the stuff you know. It would be inappropriate for us to ask the questions at this point in time. I want to wait until later. But thank you. If that's the totality of your presentation this evening, then we would like to turn it to the public, who have a chance now to put forward their positioning.
Thank you.
The gentleman's name, I actually wrote it down, although he can say it for himself, is Mr. Daniel Bufford? Buffard?
Daniel Buffard, yes.
Buffard.
Thank you.
I'm bad with names, sorry. Thank you. And your credentials, because we were told that Jack Lloyd was a lawyer. You are an HVAC specialist?
I am actually the owner and CEO of an HVAC company, and as well, I am licensed in the field, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So, Mr. Lewin, that was the entirety of your presentation for this evening and your expert witnesses. That concludes everything you wanted to say?
Yes, Mr. Buffard Carr's comments are in a report that was attached to the justification report.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Okay, having had the entirety of the submission by the applicant, are there any members of the public here wishing to address committee at this time? If this is the time for members of the public to come forward, and if you wish to do so, please come forward to the microphone, state your name for the record, and you can put your address on the sign-in sheet at the side, which the clerk will obtain from there. Sir?
My name's David Sullivan. I'm kitty corner at 1485 Port Davidson Road, kitty corner to the property. Just a couple of questions. For 4 people, why would you require 976 plants? I don't know how much one plant will produce, but for 4 critically ill people, that seems to be excessive to me. And another thing, what happens to this property when these 4 critically ill people are deceased
Or no longer in need.
or no longer in need?
Let's hope they get better.
And I'm presuming that the 150-meter fence line is going to entail all the growing facilities, and that the house that is there now and the barn that is there now is going to have nothing to do with the production? I'm not sure on that.
At the appropriate time, we'll get the answer for those questions, Mr. Sullivan, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to come forward?
I need a drink for a moment.
Just make sure it's a clean cup.
My name is Lisa Jansen, and I live directly adjacent to the property at 1374 Port Davidson Road. I've prepared a speech again for this evening. I based many of my comments in my speech based on the technical report that was emailed to me. So there may be a few comments in here that might not be completely applicable based on the presentation that our lawyer gave this evening, but I will read my speech in its entirety. We are here once again to discuss the rezoning of 1374 Port Davidson Road. This application is about taking a piece of prime agricultural land which supports a broad range of agricultural crops connected to the agri-food network and fragmenting it to allow a single crop that is not connected to the agri-food network for the use of only 4 individuals and the benefit of a 5th individual through rental income. If we look at the history of this individual's application, we see a pattern of actions which demonstrate a lack of knowledge of the agricultural industry, a lack of caring for or protecting this prime agricultural land, a lack of knowledge of how his friends intend to manage the property, and a disregard of this community. Mr. Garr purchased a piece of property that is far from his own home, and then purchased greenhouse structures without considering if these structures could be permitted on this property. Then he upgraded the hydro and began growing a crop in the barn on the property. These individuals, his 4 friends responsible for this crop and who are supposed to reside at the property, were seldom there except to tend the crop on occasionally, leaving the property unattended with the gates and barn door open and accessible by anyone. This demonstrates a group of individuals who did not live in the house but treated it as a hotel to stay at occasionally when chores took a long time and they did not want to drive home so late. He then attempted to deceive this council and our community at the second public meeting by claiming the odor emanating from the premises was coming from within the residence and was no one's business. If he has already attempted to deceive this community once, he is likely to do so in the future, intentionally or unintentionally, as he and his family will not be residing on the property. Since the property has been in his possession, it has remained nearly abandoned and uncared for, allowing a crop of a very detrimental weed to our prime agricultural lands to establish, which will not only affect his property, but all neighboring prime agricultural lands within an extremely large radius. It is only now that Mr. Garr begins to understand a little better, so that his recent application includes improved details. And I would like to thank Mr. Garr for this improved attention to detail and his willingness to address security issues and odor issues. As a municipality with residents that raise their families here, we are the ones that will be directly, continually, and daily impacted with the consequences of the decisions made in our municipality. As such, we need to consider any application associated with marijuana very thoroughly. Some of that consideration was taken into account when the zoning bylaws were amended to accommodate this reclassification of marijuana. Now, Mr. Gar would like us to make exceptions to our bylaw to accommodate his desire to utilize the barn he spent money to upgrade to grow a crop this past summer. To alter the setback allowance for his convenience would be unfair and unjust. There are many bylaws that municipality has that are inconvenient for residents who reside here, such as parking bylaws, building maintenance laws, or property maintenance laws. These bylaws have very little detrimental consequences, but we who reside here are expected to abide by these laws and are not granted exceptions on compliance. Why should he be granted an exception? The property directly across the road is indeed an unusable piece of land for agriculture, but it could be considered usable for other purposes, such things as public access to a walking, biking, hiking, or cross-country ski trail, linking rural areas to the urban center of Smithville, or the building of a home or place of business that does not take up valuable agricultural land, thus increasing our municipal tax base and potentially providing a job opportunity for residents. The fact that the land may need an environmental assessment just means that the individual who would want to utilize this piece of land would have different costs. There is a property in the hamlet of Wellandport that has a home built on the floodplain of the Chippewa River. This home was built in such a manner as to utilize the land effectively without compromising the floodplain of the surrounding habitat. There is also a property in West Lincoln that once was used to store old hydro transformers, resulting in soil contamination, which required cleanup prior to the selling of this property. It has since been cleaned up and is being lived on once again. Our current bylaws also indicate that current licensing needs to be in existence for rezoning to be considered and passed. Just because these individuals had 4 licenses previously does not mean they will be granted a renewal of these licenses. We should not rezone the land without current licensing being in place. All government agencies have forms for changing addresses on our government-issued documents. There is no hindrance for these individuals to obtain their licensing prior to the zoning approval. If zoning does not go through, they would be able to change the address on the license. I would also like to point out that serious concern and potential problems could develop with this property based on Mr. Gore's proposed manner of property use. According to the information I have read on Health Canada website and on a written response I received from Health Canada under the ACMPR, Canadians who have been authorized by the healthcare practitioner can access cannabis for medical purposes in 3 ways. Purchase quality controlled cannabis from one of the producers licensed by Health Canada, produce a limited amount of cannabis for their own medical purposes, or designate someone to produce it for them. The definition of designated grower is someone who grows marijuana for medical purposes for an individual that has a doctor's prescription. There is no designated grower in this instance. There is no one person responsible for crop management, thus allowing for good agricultural management practices to be followed. We have 4 different individuals who will do their own growing, paying a rental income to another individual. As a rental income is involved, we now have additional rental laws that would take effect should any matters of dispute arise among any of these 5 individuals. When disputes arise, people act stupidly, without thought, blinded to the consequences of their actions. As a grower of multiple horticultural plant varieties, I have a unique understanding of what it takes to grow. I also have to consider airflow, disease, pests, available sunlight, separation of different pot sizes, and ease of access. Marijuana is no different than any other plant in respect to what it needs to grow or what pests or diseases can infect this plant. Any pest or disease that can infect any greenhouse crops can infect marijuana plants. This includes such pests as aphids, fungus gnats, whitefly, thrips, snails, leaf miners, as well as spider mites. Excessively large spacing between the plants will not deter any of these insects, including spider mites. Although spider mites do not have wings and cannot fly from plant to plant like other pests, they are very adaptive at transportation through the means of 4C insect behavior. This is a fancy term for hitchhiking. Spider mites attach themselves to people, other insects, or animals to travel from plant to plant, as well as spinning a network of webbing they can crawl across. Since marijuana plants are being grown to their mature height for flowering, they do indeed require a large amount of space between plants. There are 3 basic categories of height that marijuana varieties fall into, and it is this final height and width that are needed to determine the ultimate spacing between plants as well as which method of cultivation will be utilized. On the THC Overdose website, they provide a calculator to estimate how many plants per square foot based on grow method. Each of the proposed greenhouses translates to approximately 3,600 square feet. So as you can see by this chart, for the various methods of cultivation, we have a significantly higher quantity of plants per greenhouse than the proposed 69 plants. This spacing can be varied per variety type and other personal preferences. But even by dividing these numbers by 4 or 8 to compensate for a much larger area per plant, to include concerns for increased airflow circulation, light transmission, variety separation, and working space, it certainly indicates that the proposed spacing by this applicant is extremely excessive for a successful crop. The proposed size of this marijuana garden is far greater than what is needed for 1,000 plants. And without regular inspections of the garden by an appointed town representative, a far greater quantity of plants will be grown. View on an online video from the Suspended Brands SD, which will provide insight to plant spacing and other informative information. Although plant death can occur at any stage of development, the greatest risk for large quantity plant death will occur during the seedling and cloning stage. At this stage of growth, the plants are very small and require very little space and certainly do not require an entire greenhouse. Seedlings or cuttings rooted in a 50-count tray would take 37 square feet for 1,000 plants. If started in 4-inch pots, these same plants would take up 130 square feet for 1,000 plants. As is indicated, marijuana has male and female plants, and only the females are needed to obtain the medical benefits. The only purpose of male plants is to fertilize female plants to develop seeds and crossbreed to experiment with different and new plant varieties. With today's cloning practices and feminized seed, the production of male plants can be eliminated for individuals growing simply for their own personal needs. As well, the process of growing can be different for different strains, and auto-flowering strains can produce in as little as 8 weeks, thus allowing for a faster turnover rate translating to 2 to 3 crops per 15 to 24 week span. As sativa and indica strains require specific lighting requirements, supplemental lighting will be necessary for these strains, and lights will be on in this greenhouse at night, causing a disturbance for nearby neighbors. If we take into consideration this layout design that incorporates many separate structures and movement of plant material outdoors between the different structures, we have poor agricultural management practice and drastically increased risk for plant loss as plants are exposed to outdoor temperatures and pests. Neither is it good agricultural practice to engage individuals who are seriously sick to the physically demanding tasks as will be required in order to run this operation. This indicates that more than just 4 individuals will have access to the crop grown in these greenhouses. As a single marijuana plant is so pungent that if placed on a mountaintop, it can be smelled from 20 miles away when the wind blows. So therefore, can you imagine what the concentrated smell of 1,000 marijuana plants would be like? It's not nicknamed skunk for no reason. So it is extremely important that a quality operating system not only be installed, but operate effectively on a continual basis. On paper, the listed details pertaining to the odor control system appear to seem adequate in theory. But things do not always work well in theory as they do in practice. A case in point, a recent article in the Pelham Voice, which details issues pertaining to smell emanating from Ridican Farm marijuana plant, where an operating mitigating system is supposed to be operational, but residents are left gagging from the smell. Is there a location this odor control system has been and currently is in operation where we can verify if this system operates as well as proclaimed? Can this system be easily maintained by 6 individuals, especially if there are 15 or more of these systems in place? How easy and quickly are these systems to repair if the system fails? Will the intake for the airflow occur on the end walls or the side walls of the greenhouse? These are just some of the questions I have pertaining to the system that's being proposed. I recently did some research on how many grams of usable cannabis can be expected from a single marijuana plant. I was blown away by the figures. Estimates vary from 0 to 1,500 grams, depending on the variety, plant cultivation method, and growing conditions. In average growing conditions, a photoperiod plant, which refers to sativa or indica varieties, will produce roughly 200 to 600 grams per plant, while autoflowering plants will produce roughly 300 to 120 grams per plant. Each of these patients require 50 grams per day, multiplied by 365 days a year equals to 18,250 grams of cannabis. If production comes to only 30 grams per allowable plant, and total of 240 plants for each patient would attain 7,320 grams of cannabis, far below their yearly requirement. However, if they obtain 120 grams per plant, each patient would obtain 29,280 grams of cannabis. This provides them with 11,030 grams more than their yearly allotted amount, with the following auto-flowering strains. Sativas or indicas could produce up to as little as 48,800 grams and as high as 146,400 grams of cannabis. At $10 a gram, 10,000 grams will net $100,000 of potential unreported income per individual. This is, of course, based on remaining in their allotted production amounts of 244 plants. Can you imagine what the figures would be if they produced more than their allotted 244 plants? These figures provide these patients and Mr. Gar with the ability to make an incredibly large profit. No surprise, Mr. Gar is so generously funding the purchase of this property at approximately $680,000, greenhouse structures at a cost estimate of $15,000 each, in addition to warehouse structures and equipment to help his 4 very ill, financially challenged friends. Should Mr. Gar's application be denied, his friends' right to grow their own medical marijuana is not hindered. It is simply altered to reflect the personal grow status. If their current living situation would not provide them with the ability to do this, I am confident that Mr. Gar's generosity to his friends could extend to obtaining more suitable housing that would allow them to grow their own medical marijuana and provide them with the ability to remain close to family and friends. They would then be capable of attaining a job that would not be too taxing on their seriously ill condition. As well, the initial financial investment and continual operating costs would be far more feasible for Mr. Gar and his financially challenged friends. With smaller plant quantities, security issues would be lessened and a security system more easily maintained, with the response time for the Mississauga police being excellent compared to our rural location should any security issues arise. The PPS discusses policies that reflect protecting prime agricultural land, building strong communities, and encouraging development which will enhance long-term viability and productivity of the agricultural land base, maintaining the functional and economic connections to the agri-food network. The PPS does not address medical marijuana, but rather defers this matter to local municipalities to address. Mr. Gar's representatives would have us believe that approving this application would fit in with these goals and also fit in with our municipal goals. I fail to see how this application accomplishes these goals. Although medical marijuana is now considered an agricultural crop, the building of these greenhouses and warehouse fragments this prime agricultural land, reducing the long-term viability and productivity of this prime agricultural land. It does not build a strong community with a connection to the agri-food network or the agritourism industry. It also does not promote development, which expands the property tax base of our community, as the property is still zoned agricultural, nor encourage diversified employment opportunities for any of our residents, as only these 4 individuals will supposedly be attending the crop.
Ms. Jansen, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap it up.
I'm on my last part now.
See, I knew.
This application does not conform to our current bylaws in regards to medical marijuana, as is not a wholly enclosed structure, does not meet our setback allowances, and does not have current licensing. The size of the gross space in manufacturing warehouse is far more excessive than what is required for the existing 4 licenses. As it stands, this application must be denied, and we need more details than what we have been provided. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe Ms. Jansen is familiar with the fact that she will provide us with a copy. Pardon me.
Just trying to put it in the right order for you.
There you go. Keep that close. I'll need a reminder. Our staff are very good at reminding me that we need copies where possible.
Who would you like me to pass it to?
Wherever, just if I could perhaps suggest that we take a 5-minute recess at this point in time to allow for people to recharge their drinks, stretch their legs, and do whatever else is necessary before we continue. Thank you.